One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
In July of 1969, Neil Armstrong made history, becoming the first person to ever set foot on the moon. The U.S. winning the space race against the Soviet Union with the crew of Apollo 11. Then, more than 3 years later, in December of 1972, Gene Cernan also making history, becoming the last person to stand on the lunar surface during Apollo 17.
We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and in hope for all mankind.
In total, across 6 crewed missions, astronauts brought home 842 pounds of moon rocks, dust, and more. The samples have been a boon for scientists working to learn more about the history of our moon, our planet, and the universe. But it wasn't just researchers taking advantage of Apollo.
In the late 1990s, there were con artists selling moon rocks all over the world.
Joseph Goodhines has a storied career. Starting off as an Army intelligence officer and pilot, he eventually found his way to the NASA Office of Inspector General, where he served as a senior special agent. While there, Goodhines decided he wanted to tackle the issues of scammers selling fake moon rocks with a sting operation.
And I start drawing out my plans for Operation Lunar Eclipse. Create the name of the company, John's Estate Sales, decide who I'm going to bring in on the case, figure out where I'm going to have the fictional office located, and so forth.
The goal, get scammers to come to them.
We put an ad in USA Today, moon rocks wanted, with an astronaut jumping on the moon.
Goodhines says it didn't take long for someone to call, but it wasn't what he expected.
I answer using my alias, Tony Coriasso, and a dedicated hello line. And he says, hey, Tony, you know, all those other guys are calling you. Those are bogus deals. I've got the real thing. I said, okay. He says, I'll direct you to a webpage and you can take a look for yourself. And I'm expecting to see some little rock or something like that.
What he saw was similar to this, a wooden plaque with a rock encased in a lucite ball with a flag and 2 metal plates, except
the center of the flag is blocked out, as is the name of the recipient country on the plaque.
It turns out it was a goodwill moon rock. After Apollo 11 and Apollo 17, President Richard Nixon ordered the creation of these plaques to give to countries around the world, as well as the 50 states. Each contained a resin ball with moon rocks, as well as a flag that flew aboard the missions, representing each country and state. It was meant as a goodwill gesture. Goodhines was looking at a real moon rock.
So I start negotiating with this guy, and he wants $5 million for us to purchase from him this moon rock and plaque.
Goodhines says neither NASA nor any other government agency would give him the $5 million for the sting. So he turned to another source, Texas billionaire and former presidential candidate Ross Perot. Now, it might sound like something out of a movie, but Goodhines says they actually pulled off the sting.
We get the moon rock with seizure warrant, and then we have one of the craziest forfeiture cases ever.
And it turns out the display belonged to Honduras.
We finally won that case, and in 2003, I believe it was, I flew to Washington, D.C., where I met with the ambassador of Honduras and the head of NASA, and we presented the Honduras Apollo 17 Goodwill moon rock back to Honduras.
After the case, Goodhines realized many of the Goodwill moon rocks were unaccounted for, including many of the ones given to states. After NASA, he started teaching, launching the Moon Rock Project, where his graduate students worked to help track down the missing rocks.
One of the North Carolina moon rocks was found in a drawer. There was another that was found in a shoebox out in Colorado. And it was just one after the next story like that.
The search effort found its way to South Carolina. Goodhines tells us between 2002 and 2012, his students reached out to every museum in the state, as well as the governor's office. That's where they confirmed the location of South Carolina's Apollo 11 display. Fox Carolina reached out to the curator at the governor's mansion, Nancy Bunch, and got access to the display. You can see the small lunar samples above the state flag that flew aboard that historic mission. Bunch says the display is normally locked away for safekeeping, but it is brought out occasionally for guests or by request. It joins other space-centric artifacts connected to the Palmetto State, including framed memorabilia from Apollo 16, the mission where South Carolina native Charlie Duke became one of the 12 people to walk on the moon. We decided to dive deeper to learn the history of the Apollo 11 display. The Nixon Presidential Library and Museum provided these archival photos to us, showing the moment President Nixon gave Governor Robert McNair the lunar samples during a governor's conference in late 1969. The display was then brought back to Columbia. We reached out to the Walker Local and Family History Center at the Richland Library. They helped us find these photos from the state newspaper photograph archive showing the moon rocks at the governor's office and the State House. While the Moon Rock Project successfully confirmed the Apollo 11 display's location, Goodhines tells us South Carolina's Apollo 17 moon rock remained unaccounted for.
I've been here 10 years. It hasn't been on view in any of our space exhibits while I've been here.
That is, until this summer, when Fox Carolina reached out to Robin Teesbrummel, the Director of Collections Management at the State Museum in Columbia. We asked her if the museum had the missing display. She sent us this photo of a wooden plaque with a worn South Carolina flag and a lucite ball containing a rock.
The moon rock came to us in 1998, and actually before that it was owned by the Columbia Museum of Art, because the Columbia Museum of Art used to have a very large planetarium and science collection. And so when they kind of shifted to focusing more on art, we received a lot of the science things from its collection.
We asked Teesbrummel why the museum could not confirm they had the display in the early 2000s. She says she's not sure.
Here maybe it just went to the wrong person, like the wrong person's desk who didn't know, because it certainly was in the database since 1998.
But there was one big change that likely helped this time around.
We did in 2018 move to a new database. The state legislature funded some digital improvements for our collection. One of those was a newer, easier to search database. We've also been working since 2019 through, again, the state legislature and the Institute of Museum and Library Services on a really big digitization project. And so by the time you had asked where this rock was, my team had already gone through the files and added a lot more information to that cataloging record.
With more than 1.1 million pieces in the museum's permanent collection, the task of cataloging everything will take years. But now the collection's more accessible than ever. Just go to the website.
So there's a keyword search. You can search by the donor. If you know that your relative donated something, you can type a name in. You can search by moon rocks and see the moon rocks that we have in our collections.
In fact, this updated system is why the Apollo 17 moon rock is going on public display for the first time in years.
It's a rock from the moon.
Heather McPherson is the curator of collections at the South Carolina Military Museum. A few months ago, she began planning out a new exhibit.
So this exhibit is called High Altitude Service and really explores South Carolina veterans who have gone on to work for NASA. It also kind of goes back to the origins, the military origins of space exploration.
McPherson used the State Museum's database to find artifacts they could borrow. That's how she found the moon rock.
It represents that exploration of space and going to other worlds just to learn about it, what's outside of our atmosphere. So yeah, it's a tangible piece of history that people can look at.
McPherson tells us she had no idea about the surreal story behind the display.
That's one great thing about doing exhibits is you always learn something new, even about the objects themselves.
The moon rock joins other fascinating space items throughout the decades, many highlighting well-known heroes.
Focusing on the South Carolina veterans, we have the U.S. Air Force jacket of Charles Duke, who was the 10th man to walk on the moon.
Duke happens to have a connection to the Apollo 17 display. Not only was he on the backup crew for the mission, he was also the one to present the moon rock to Governor John West in 1973. The rock being put on public display helps Goodhines' mission. He recalls what an astronaut once told him.
He said, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a pilot. And then I went to a museum, I believe it was Smithsonian. He says, I see this moon rock display. And the closer I get to the display, the more certain I become. I don't want to be a pilot or just a pilot anymore. I want to be an astronaut. And he said, that changed my life. And so when I think of these moon rocks in museums and universities and so forth, open to the public, I think of young people looking at this.
It also helps fulfill Apollo 17's mission. The rock is a fragment from one of the last lunar samples collected by humans on the moon's surface.
We'd like to share a piece of this rock with so many of the countries throughout the world. We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future.
The State Museum tells us the Apollo 17 moon rock could go on display at one of their future exhibits. But if you want to see it right now, then you can see it at the Military Museum. High altitude service, South Carolina in space, is happening now through January. You can see all kinds of interesting space artifacts, including the Apollo 17 moon rock. The exhibit is at the South Carolina Military Museum in Columbia. That's off National Guard Road near Williams-Brice Stadium. The museum is open from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, Monday through Saturday, and it's completely free.